Thank you, Sean, for an excellent overview, and I think it's wonderful that there's an Australian among us who's playing such a positive role in Burma. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my great pleasure and indeed my great honour to introduce Daw Aung Suu Kyi. Daw Suu's story is remarkable. The daughter of Burmese independence leader General Aung San, she was educated at Oxford, which is also my alma mater, Daw Suu. She returned to Burma in 1988 and she led the National League for Democracy to a landslide victory in the 1990 general election. However, the military government refused to recognise the results, and Daw Suu spent most of the next 20 years under house arrest. Over this period, she led a non-violent campaign of opposition to the military authorities, which put Burma at the centre of the world's attentions. She was released from house arrest in November 2010. In April 2012, Daw Suu was elected to the lower house of Parliament, where she now sits as opposition leader and chairperson of the NLD. Ladies and gentlemen, Daw Aung Suu Kyi represents a very rare combination of qualities. On the one hand, she is one of the great moral figures of our age. She is a Nobel Peace Prize laureate and a universal symbol of courage and hope. And over the last quarter century, she has changed Burma and inspired the world. But on the other hand, and I think this is the interesting bit, Daw Suu is a practising politician, the leader of a political party, and perhaps one day the president of a country of 55 million people wedged strategically between China and India. And this combination of a domestic political leader who is also a universal symbol of human rights and democracy is exceptional, and the only other person I can think of who falls into this category in my lifetime is Nelson Mandela. So for that reason, Daw Suu, we welcome you very warmly to the Lowy Institute, and may I ask you to join me on stage. Daw Suu, may I start by quoting Martin Luther King, Dr. King, who said that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. But we know that the arc of history doesn't bend by itself. So what was it that made you think that you could bend the arc of history toward justice?
I didn't think of myself as bending the arc of history. I thought that it was something that I could do together with the people. If you don't carry the people of your country with you, you can't achieve anything of any worth in the long run. So it's been a series of little choices in your life that have got you to this point. It wasn't one big series of big choices. Yes.
And I noticed yesterday you referred to, the interviewer asked you about the sacrifices you made, and you corrected him. You said they're not sacrifices, they're choices. What did you mean by that?
It's just that. I chose to do what I'm doing now. I chose the path I wanted to walk, and I have no right to complain about it. I worked out that it was not going to be a very easy path, but I thought that it was one that I wanted to walk together with my people. So I'm satisfied. I had the right and I had the opportunity to choose the path I wanted to walk, and not everybody has that opportunity, and I consider myself fortunate.
Can I ask what sustained you during your long years under house arrest when your movements were so restricted and you were separated from your family and your children? I think the BBC might have been one of the things that sustained
Well, I think
you.
Sean was one of those, because I learned about him on the BBC. And it was very nice to know that there were people outside in the big wide world who were not only concerned about what was going on in Burma, but were concerned in an informed way, in an intelligent way. Being concerned is not enough. You have to go about it in the right way.
Now you spend, you spent most of that time in Rangoon, a wonderful, charming city, and now you spend a lot of time in a different house, Rose Cottage, in a very different city, the capital, Naypyidaw.
I don't like the name Rose Cottage. There are no roses around there.
You're right, and as Sean said, Naypyidaw is somewhat lacking in charm. I know you won't mind my saying that. It has giant presidential palaces and multi-lane highways and no people to be seen anywhere except security forces. But you're in Naypyidaw because you're a parliamentarian and you're a practicing politician, as I said. How has it been, how have you found it to change gears from being, and switch from being a global human rights paragon to a national political leader?
Well, this is a question I always find very strange, because I've always thought that I was a politician. I look upon myself as a politician and not as an icon. I always object to the expression icon, the word icon, because it's very static, isn't it? It just stands there or sits there or hangs on the wall. And I have to work very, very hard. And so I do object to being referred to as an icon. It seems to indicate that I do nothing except let myself be shown. I've always worked very hard. I've always thought that I was a politician, because I came into politics as the founder of a political party. I can't think of anything being more political than that. And for me, it's not a transition. It's just a continuation of the journey I started back in 1988.
And yet still it's a different stage in the journey, isn't it? When you're actually a parliamentarian, you're a committee chair, you're interacting daily with the other leaders of the country, rather than playing a political role from your house in Rangoon.
So my responsibilities have multiplied.
Yeah.
And of course I've had to get used to Naypyidaw, which is one of the biggest responsibilities of all.
Let me ask you about compromise, and I think this is a question you've got before. Many of your supporters who have admired you for so many years, I think, look to you for purity. But of course, as a former Australian Prime Minister said, only the impotent are pure. And there are necessary compromises in politics. So how do you strike that balance between the compromises that are essential, but at the same time remaining true to your principles?
Well, I don't know why they thought that I was not the compromising type, because I started out in politics compromising. I don't know how many of you know about the history of the National League for Democracy, but it was founded by 3 different groups. There were those who were part of my group, as it were, and there were those who were led by retired General U Tin Oo, and these were retired army officers. They called themselves the patriotic, I don't know how it translates into English, the patriotic old comrades, that's right, patriotic old comrades. They were all retired army officers. And then there was another group led by, again, a retired brigadier, Daw Aung, but that was not made up entirely of retired army officers. It was made up mostly, I think, of people who were close to him personally. So these 3 groups got together to found the National League for Democracy. And it was a compromise to begin with, because there were many within those groups who could not get on with one another. But we had to get together in order to create the kind of united front we needed to lead the movement for democracy. So I started out in politics understanding very well the necessity as well as the value of compromise, but compromise based on principles. We were not going to compromise with those who did not believe in democratic values. I think, again, those of you who followed the history of the NLD will be aware of the fact that Daw Aung's faction broke away from us quite early, that is to say about three months after the founding of the party. And this was again to do with whether or not democratic principles were essential for a party that said that it was working for democracy. So Daw Aung's faction left the party and founded another one. So we started off very, very political. And I think the view of me as a sort of democracy icon, or some kind of, what I really dislike most of all, some kind of saint. And let me assure you, I'm no saint of any kind. This I find very troubling, because politicians are politicians, but I do believe that there is such a thing as an honest politician, and I aspire to be that.
Can I ask you then, if you've always seen yourself as a politician, and indeed the history of the NLD is wrapped up in political compromises between different factions, Do you get frustrated by some in the international community and some in the human rights lobby who hold you to a different standard from every other politician in the world?
No, not frustrated, sometimes a little surprised, because I think perhaps they haven't done their homework. If they had, they wouldn't think that I was that kind of personality. And sometimes, I have to confess, a little irritated, because, not frustrated, irritated. Again, for the same reason, I think that people should do their homework. I always get I get a little short-tempered with people who come to interview me and who know nothing about what they're talking about. I think that is not fair, because I have to prepare for the interviews, and I expect my counterpart to have done the same thing too.
Let me ask you, you see yourself as a politician, and indeed you're a politician with ambitions to be president. You've said that, I think, at the World Economic Forum, I think was the first time you said that. You said it last night at the Sydney Opera House. For that to happen, Burma's constitution needs to be changed, as Sean alluded to. You said last night that it should be, perhaps you should be flattered that you're the only person in the world that's had a constitution designed specifically for her, actually to prohibit her from taking that office of president. What are the prospects of such constitutional change occurring?
I think they're good, but I think we have to work to make sure that the amendments take place. Why I say that the prospects are good is because the great majority of our people, now that they've begun to understand what the issue is about, are very much in favour of constitutional amendment. The great majority of them didn't know what was in the Constitution when they were supposed to have voted for it in the referendum in 2008. In fact, a lot of them did not vote for it. Somehow their votes were counted, but they didn't really vote. But so I do believe that with the great majority of the people behind us, we will be able to achieve these amendments sooner or later. But as I keep saying, the sooner the better. What
can a country like Australia do to try to encourage the forces in Burma pushing for constitutional change?
I think, first of all, ordinary Australians, as many as possible, should be aware of the issue, need to be aware of the issue, so that they would be able to support us. And I think as a democracy, you should also make sure that your government is aware of the issue and prepared to support us.
Let me ask you, Daw Suu, if you were elected president, what would be your priorities as president? Unity.
When we contested the by-elections last year, the three main planks of our election platform were rule of law, internal peace, an end to ethnic conflict, and thirdly, amendments to the Constitution. We chose those three because they're all connected. I don't have to go on about rule of law because Sean has very kindly done that for me, but it's essential for our country politically, socially, and economically. And without rule of law, we will not be able to achieve lasting peace, because whatever agreement we may come to formally with the ethnic nationalities, we will not be able to maintain these agreements without the rule of law and without the necessary institutions that will make sure that there is rule of law in our country. And of course, amendments to the Constitution are essential to the other two. So one would assume that if I become president, it's because the Constitution has been amended. But Section 59 is not the only bit that needs amending. There are other parts of the Constitution that we need to amend, that we may become a truly democratic union, a union of many ethnic nationalities. And this is going to be one of the first tasks that we must address.
And let me ask you about that in particular. What exactly would your administration do to reach a long-term solution to some of these questions associated with ethnic minorities, in particular violence being done to ethnic minorities?
Violence of any kind is something which is totally against the principles of the NLD. We became a political party on the understanding that we would not engage in violence to achieve the ends that we were working towards. So we are against all forms of violence, communal violence, ethnic violence, individual personal violence. And we believe that answers to our problems should be worked out across the table. Very often during the last 3 decades, the military government accused me of confrontation. I said, yes, I do believe in confrontation across the table or just sitting in 2 chairs like this. That is confrontation, but of the kind that is acceptable and democratic. We exchange ideas, we may argue with one another, we thrash out our disagreements. We don't believe in confrontation through violence and through the use of weapons. When I was released in 2010, I talked about 21st century Panglong. Panglong is the conference in 1947 at which the ethnic nationalities, not all of them, but some of them, the major ones, agreed to work together with the majority Burmese to try to achieve independence for our country. Now, the importance of Panglong is not actually the particular agreements made, but that it was the first time there was a political agreement between the Burmese majority and the other ethnic nationalities to work together towards a certain political end. It was agreed in Panglong that we would be able to achieve independence quicker by working together. So for us, it's the spirit of Panglong that is essential, not the details of the agreement, because as I said earlier, not all the ethnic nationalities were part of the Panglong agreement. So in 2010, when we said that we wanted to move towards a 21st century Panglong, we meant a conference of all the ethnic nationalities, including the Burmese, who are also one of the ethnic nationalities, except that we happen to be the majority. We want to sit down together and work out what kind of union we want. A democratic union, a federal form, we agreed. And I would like to make the point that the National League for Democracy was the only political party during the 20 years from 1988, after the military regime came in, that talked openly about the need for a federal system. At that time, there were many who looked upon the word federal as high treason because the army had pushed the propaganda that federalism meant right to secession. And we had to explain that it was nothing of that kind. So we stood by it and we still stand by it. But we have to agree on what kind of federal union we want. And that is not something that will be achieved easily. We recognize that. But I do believe that we can achieve that by talking to one another and by making mutual respect and mutual trust the basis of our agreement.
Let me switch, if I can, to economics for a minute. Burma was once a very rich country, and as Sean described, it's now a poor country. What kind of economic transformation would you push for if you were elected president?
A responsible kind of economic transition and a carefully worked out economic policy. At the moment, I feel that everything is ad hoc. We have a saying in Burmese which is very nice, which means that wherever the water ripples, you throw some bait down there, so that you don't have a plan, you don't have an overall plan, you don't have a vision of where you want to go. I have a vision of where I want to go, and Sean knows that. I have always been aware of the fact that we are an agricultural-based country. About 70% of our people earn their lives through some kind of agricultural-related work. But I want a 21st century attitude towards agriculture. I think too often people are thinking of progress for Burma now in terms of what was achieved in the 20th century by other ASEAN countries. But we mustn't forget that we're now into the second decade of the 21st century. We can't be bound by 20th century thinking. And I want our agriculture economy to be based on the fact that food security is going to be a major issue for the world today. People talk a lot about food security, but I don't see that there is much done in the way of economic policy that is related to food security. Food is needed everywhere. And when you talked about the strategic position of Burma between the two large countries, Asia and India. Now, China and India. Both China and India are going to be in great need of food, not in the far future, but in the near future. And we've got to make use of our opportunities to provide the world with what they need. So I want the kind of new economic approach that is based on what others will not be able to do, because they've already taken a different road. And once you've taken a different road, it's very difficult to change tack. For us, in a way, we have a clean slate, and we can implement the kind of policies that would be very, very costly for other countries which had already taken a different route last century to take without too much cost. So that is what I want. I want Burma to be rooted, the Burmese economy to be rooted not just in what we have to offer, but what the world needs. Only in this way will we be able to not just catch up with, I tend to be rather ambitious, but to overtake all those countries which did well in the 20th century.
One of the barriers to Burma achieving that ambition and overtaking other countries is the corruption in the country. And when I was in Rangoon, I was struck by the number of massive houses everywhere in Rangoon. And my taxi driver would say, "That's a crony, this is a crony, this is a crony." And I saw recently that one prominent Burmese businessman said he didn't want to be a bad crony, he wanted to be a good crony. So let me ask you, is there such a thing as a good crony and a bad crony, or are cronies cronies? And what would be your solution for this problem of crony corruption?
Could I ask you exactly what you mean by crony?
I mean a well-connected businessman who gets good deals from the government and good access to lucrative contracts and so on without proper competition, and uses that monopoly in ways that are detrimental to the country in general.
Then I think I can say that all those who are branded cronies are not cronies, because I think it is true that all those who did well under the military regime had good relations with those who were in power. That I will not deny. But that does not necessarily mean that all of those who made sure that they kept their relations with the military regime good did all the other things as well. Not all the cronies engaged in illegal or unjust practices. They just made sure that their relations with the regime were good enough for them to use their business skills there to do well. There are, of course, others who did use their contacts with the regime to grab land, for example, unjustly, and to get deals in a way that was not fair. So I think there are cronies and cronies. And as I believe in the rule of law, I do work on the principle that everybody must be deemed innocent until proven guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt. And apart from that, even if they have been proven guilty, I do think that people have the right to redeem themselves. They should be given the opportunity to redeem themselves. I'm very happy to use money given to me not to me directly, but to the programs that I'm trying to implement, humanitarian programs I'm trying to implement. I'm very happy to have cronies, people who are branded as cronies, help me with these. I call them my tame cronies. Very nice they are too.
I can well understand they find you formidable, Daw Suu. Let me ask a couple of final questions and then I'm going to go to the audience. You've mentioned the role of the military, and of course your father was really the father of the Burmese army, and one sees his picture everywhere in Rangoon, usually in a military uniform. What role, but obviously you've had a different kind of history with the military over the last couple of decades. What role do you see the military playing in Burma in the future if you were elected president?
A good professional military, a good professional army that is respected and loved by the people. That was what my father intended it to be. Very early on, when he spoke, he made a speech, I think this was during the war, a speech to the army. He said, there were two things he said, which I think that all the members of the Burmese military should remember. The first one was this, that The country should not be the servant of the army. The army must be the foundation, the base of the country. And then the second thing he said, not in the same speech, was that don't think that you are the only ones who love your country. There are other people who are just as patriotic as you are, who are not military men, and who have made great sacrifices for the country. Now, I think these 2 points our military should always remember, because during the years of military dictatorship, the propaganda was that only the military were capable of loving the country, that nobody else, nobody outside the military was capable of the kind of patriotic fervor that they were capable. And this is entirely against the principle on which my father worked, that the army was there as a foundation of the nation, which means that to support the nation, to protect the nation, to defend the nation, but that just because you were a soldier, you could not claim that you were more patriotic than the rest of the population.
Thank you. If you were elected president, then you would help to guide Burma's foreign policy. How do you think, how would you see Burma navigating its relationships with the United States, a country that under President Obama is trying to pivot towards Asia, China, a country that is rising within Asia, and of course India, which is also on your border, the world's largest democracy in itself, a powerful country. Do you think Burma might become an arena for strategic rivalry between these powers, and how should Burma pick its way between these giant countries?
I do think it's as difficult as all that. If you look back on the history of independent Burma, we did that very well. When we became independent in 1948, we established very good relations with the West, with the British, whom we had managed to push out, very, very kindly and in a very civilized way. And we had very, very good relations. We established very good relations with the United States and, of course, with India. Now, when we became independent in 1948, China was in turmoil. But later, when the Chinese communist government came into power, Burma was one of the first countries to recognize it officially. But we still maintained excellent relations with the West and with India. We navigated our foreign policy waters very, very well and very calmly. And I do not understand why there should be any worry that we would not be able to do it again. I think, as I said earlier, I do believe in honest politics, and I think there is such a thing as honest international relations as well.
Thank you, Daw Suu. We don't want to encourage the perception that foreign policy is very easy, because, of course, the Lowy Institute exists because it's very, very difficult. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a short amount of time for some questions and answers. If I call on you, can I ask you to wait for the microphone before you put your question to Daw Suu? Can I ask you to mention your name so we know who we're hearing from? And can I please ask you to keep your questions short? First of all, I want to call on a Burmese Australian, Dr. Mint Cho. Could you just wait for the microphone? Thank you, sir.
Daw Suu, you have spoken of the need for responsible investment many times. Can you be clearer what you expect companies to do? And can you share your thoughts on the impact investment can have on Burma? Thank you.
When we say responsible engagement, investment, we mean responsibility towards the country where you're investing, as well as, of course, towards your own company. I expect those who invest in Burma to be able to make a profit. I know that when businesses invest, they invest because they expect to make a profit. And I really have no respect for businesses which are incapable of making profits. And what's the point of their coming to my country? But I want them to be aware of the fact that we need to benefit as well. We in the country where they are investing. It's got to be a two-way traffic. And there must be, of course, social responsibility, environmental responsibility, but I do not want them to forget political responsibility as well. Too often businesses pretend that they have nothing to do with the politics of the country, and they're just there because of the economic situation. But you cannot divorce economics from politics. And I would like those who are investing in Burma to promote the right kind of political policies that our country, as well as their business, might prosper. That is what I mean by responsible investment, not just thinking of the environment. You may have all the laws that may look good, but unless these laws are enforceable, that's where rule of law comes in, it's no use. And then, of course, with FDI, all the foreign direct investment laws that you may wish may be there, but if there's no proper framework for rule of law in the country, you cannot depend on those laws either. And I'm sure that a lot of businesses know that. In the end, it's very simple. It's business confidence. Business confidence means that there has to be a right environment for the business. That is to say, political, social, economic. And I just want those who are trying to invest in Burma to be aware of that. And I do want to remind people that governments come and governments go. Don't be too eager to establish good relations with those who are presently in power. Please think of the long run.
The next hand I saw was Bill Rothery, but just let me jump on that quickly. How would you assess Australia on this question of dealing with the current government versus perhaps dealing with a future government? How would you assess Australian government policy towards Burma at the moment?
I think many governments, not just the Australian governments, do like to get on with whoever happens to be in power at the moment. But as I said, I think it's better to look to the long run. And after all, aren't Australians supposed to be rather inclined to take risks? I mean, aren't you supposed to be a rather daring, reckless young nation? So you must be very daring and very reckless, but at the same time, it would be very, very sensible of you to put your bets on us.
Right, there are some diplomats in the audience taking note. Bill Rothery.
Hi, my name is Bill Rothery. I work for a multinational conglomerate called Swire, who already have a presence in Burma. I'd just like to make an observation, if I may, first, and that is as a first-time tourist to your country earlier this year, to those of you in the room who haven't had the fortune to go to Burma, can I commend it without reservation or hesitation. It was the most wonderful holiday that I've had, and certainly one where it's a beautiful country with wonderful people. My question, Daw Suu, and I'm afraid it's a slightly naive one, and therefore I'm worried that you might be a little bit irritated by it. But it's to do with foreign investment and what the current government's policy is with regard to foreign investment in property and land, and whether you have any alternative views to the current policy for foreign investment.
First of all, I think in general the present government's attitude towards investment is the more the better. I think it's not as discriminating as it should be. And with regard to land and property, that is a big problem. I think Sean mentioned the problem of land tenure and the fact that a lot of land was confiscated illegally or transferred, if you like, which is perhaps a politer term, in questionable ways over the last 20 to 30 years. And this has created enormous problems. Land ownership is a big problem today and will continue to be for some time. We are now trying to sort it out. The legislature formed a commission to look into the illegal transfer of land, and since the work of the commission started, so many cases of illegal transfer of land, of problematic ownership with regard to land has come up that this commission really doesn't quite know how it's going to be able to resolve all these cases. Now, the price of land in Burma is rocketing. I think any of you who have been trying to invest there will be aware of it. Land prices are rocketing, rents are rocketing, beyond economic proportions. And all this will have to be sorted out, not just by the right kind of regulations and laws, but law enforcement. It's no use having regulations that are not enforceable. So I do not, the Burmese law does not allow foreigners to buy land, but of course you can have long leases, and you can lease, I think, up to 50,000 acres if you are a foreign company of agricultural land. But I would like you to go about this very carefully, and I will be quite honest, I think that these laws need looking into to make sure that they really are in conformity with the needs of our country for the future. And if you are thinking of investing in land in Burma, I would like to ask the question, for what purpose? What are you intending to do with that land? And that is the question I would ask before I will say whether or not I agree with your decision or your desire to make such an investment. What are you wanting to use this land for?
Next hand I saw was on the corner, yes.
Virginia Horscroft, I work for the World Bank in the Pacific region. You mentioned that when countries go down one road, it can be very difficult to change direction. But I was wondering what you would say were the critical junctions and turning points in the road in the struggle for democracy, even if they weren't taken, the times when you saw an opportunity to direct the NLD.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the last bit.
Saw an opportunity to sort of direct the strategy of the NLD to try and take advantage of these junctions?
Well, we've always been doing that. We've always had to wait for the opportunities to do what we wish to do. We had the opportunity first time in 1990. There were the elections, and this was interesting. Again, it was a question of compromise. We were talking about politics and compromise. But just before I was placed under house arrest in 1989, the election laws came out for the 1990 elections. And our party had a conference to discuss whether or not we should contest the elections. Now, according to these laws, there were no provisions for the transfer of power. And I was one of those who were against contesting the elections, the forthcoming elections. I said, look, there are no provisions for the transfer of power, so those elections are not going to lead to a change in government. Therefore, I do not think that by contesting the elections, we will be able to come to power or form a government. And therefore, I was against contesting the elections. But there were those who said that they believed that the military regime would keep its promise and transfer power to whichever party won. Now, as it was, about a month after these discussions, I was placed under house arrest. I don't know whether the fact that I was against contesting the elections had anything to do with the decision to place me under house arrest. But after I was placed under house arrest, those members of our Central Executive Committee who remained free, because U Tin Oo was also arrested, they decided that they would, by democratic vote, that they would contest the elections. And the decision was conveyed to me officially, and I was asked to be a candidate in the forthcoming elections. Now, this is what I mean by compromise in politics. I decided that since it was a democratic decision, I must abide by that. And although personally I was against contesting the elections, I agreed. I agreed to the decision of the CEC, and I agreed to contest, to be a candidate. Now, this had interesting consequences. There was a protest by the rival candidate who represented the then pro-regime party, the old BS, the Burma Socialist Program Party, which had changed its name to be the National Unity Party. National Unity Party, yes. And so he protested against my candidature on the grounds that I had broken the regulations, the election regulations, which stipulate that no candidate must accept assistance from foreign sources. Now, so this came up, and at first it came up at the township level, and there was secret voting, and the voting was in my favor, that this accusation was not was not sustainable, and that I should be allowed to contest the elections. But then the candidate from the other party took it up to the divisional level, and there they said no secret voting. It's got to be open voting, and of course, then the government side won, and I was disqualified. After I was disqualified, I said to the military intelligence officer who was in charge of my security, so to speak, I said, since I have been disqualified, I would like to know why. I have the right to know the official reason why I have been disqualified. I would like to read those official papers. I want a copy of those papers. And a copy of the papers were given to me. And I was amazed to find that they had disqualified me because they said that the BBC had broadcast programs which were in my favor, and that meant I was accepting assistance from foreign sources. And it was on those grounds that I was disqualified as a candidate. So these compromises happened all the time. And I was against contesting the elections. My party contested the elections. We won 82% of the seats. I've always said that this proves that sometimes in politics there isn't one single answer which is the right one. Now, I was right in saying that there would be no transfers of power, but I think my party was also right in deciding to contest the elections. It is because of the way in which we won the 1990 elections that the world recognized that the people were behind the NLD, that the people of Burma wanted democracy, and that helped us a great deal in the years ahead. So this is why compromise in politics is not wrong, because often in politics there are more than one answer.
I could see the Premier nodding at that masterclass in political power. The last question I'm going to give to Jenny Hayward-Jones from the Lowy Institute.
You've talked in the last few months a lot about the poor representation of women in Parliament in Burma and identified this as a problem. It's also a problem in the Pacific Islands, Australia's near region. I was wondering if you could explain what strategies you and the NLD might pursue to increase the political participation of women in political life generally and increase their opportunities to win seats in Parliament in the future.
There are two sides to this. First of all, first is capacity building. We have to consider whether there are not as many women as there should be in politics because there is a need to build up capacity. But secondly, we also have to consider the fact that it may not be because the women lack capacity, but because there are cultural forces which work against their entering politics in the way in which they should enter it. I was asked this question yesterday about a male-dominant society, Burma being a male-dominant society, and I said, yes, maybe it may be male-dominant, but it doesn't mean our men are stronger than the women. I've always thought, actually, that Burmese women are stronger. But there are these cultural attitudes. I think there are still women who feel that it's not seemly for a woman to be pushy, and that it somehow detracts from her dignity or her value to be seen as pushy. So these are cultural issues which have to be resolved. In the WEF meeting in Bangkok in 2012, we had this discussion about women's position. There were those who said that it was economics that decided whether or not there was gender equality. And I didn't quite agree with that, because at that very discussion, it was made quite clear that the greatest gender discrimination in Asia is found in Japan and in South Korea. Now, if economics is the reason why there's gender discrimination, there should be no gender discrimination in either Japan or South Korea, because they are the most affluent Asian countries. So I think it's cultural factors. In Burma, let's just look at the field of education. I would say 99.9% of our teachers are women. But by the time you get to the level of township educational officer, the position is reversed. Most of our TEOs are men. Why is that? And why do the women accept this? I think still a great majority of our women feel very reluctant about saying, this is not right. I have as much, I deserve this post as much as he does. It's not something that Burmese women do in general. Now, when I said that I would like to be president, I think that made some people feel very uneasy, but not the ordinary people, but just those who are engaged in politics, because I think they think it's a great threat for a woman to come forward and say that I can be much better than you.
Daw Suu, I think if we needed evidence for the proposition that men are not necessarily stronger than women, this interview has given us evidence for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we've run out of time. I apologise to those we didn't get to. I couldn't get to everybody because Daw Suu needs to get to Canberra. Can I thank Sean Turnell very warmly for his remarks, and we very much enjoyed collaborating with you, Sean, and your team from Macquarie University. Daw Suu, we'd like to give you a small gift to thank you for visiting Bligh Street. Although this is your first visit to Australia, I've read that you've long been familiar with Australian culture because as a child, I believe, you grew up listening to the song Kookaburra Sits in the Old Gum Tree.
Yes. I didn't realise it was an Australian song there.
Yes, yes. We can safely say that, I think.
I was also brought up as Waltzing Matilda.
Okay, well, I didn't know that when I was choosing my gift. But we have found an old engraving of a kookaburra to remind you of us.
Thank you.
Daw Suu, I want to make clear this is not an icon because I know you don't like icons. It's an engraving, and I hope that this might find a place on the walls of your house on the shore of Lake Inya in Rangoon, and when you look at it, you may think of us at the Lowy Institute.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have had a wonderful exhibition today. We've seen Daw Suu's defining characteristics, her strength, her dignity, her sense of humour, but above all, and I think unexpectedly, a proud politician who gives compromise a very, very fine name. So
Principled compromise.
Principled compromise. So can I ask you please to thank very warmly Daw Aung.